Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. It's winter. I have not been out ice fishing yet this winter. It usually takes some planning and enough time to pack and unpack all the equipment. I did have some time off on Friday, and I decided to cross-country ski instead, but I skied across Grays Bay, and it was cold. I stopped and talked to one fisherman. He'd caught some crappies and some small northerns, he said he lost a giant northern and also missed out on a muskie that he saw through the ice. And that's the fishing report from the tundra. A little different than the one we get in today's reading from the warm shores of the Sea of Galilee. Catching big fish might not be a wow moment for you, or maybe it is. It has been for me, and it was for the disciples in today's story. In the last few years, I've had some of my most exhilarating fishing outings. About 3 years ago, I caught my biggest fish ever in my kayak. It was a 6-pound bass, which I released. This last summer, I caught my largest northern ever on Grays Bay when it wasn't iced over. Not huge by northern standards, but it was for me, about 32 inches. Fishing is foundational to cultures all over the world, and the techniques and species vary so much. Years ago, when I served as an intern north of Seattle, I was invited to go out fishing with one of my members there on the shores of the Puget Sound. I got my license and wore some old clothes and shoes. And the plan was not to go out in a boat. Our plan was to wade into the water. We weren't trying to catch fish. We were digging for clams and catching crabs. Catching Dungeness crab is actually pretty easy. Raider was his name, had a makeshift contraption. It was a broom handle, and he had affixed a basket to it. And when you saw a crab, you just put it down and try to catch the crab, but usually you don't even have to catch them. They just grab onto the metal cage and they never let go. It's for kind of easy fishing. But, most of the time, you just make sure they're not grabbing onto your toes. So, remains one of my favorite memories because I love shellfish, and I couldn't believe that I got to go out in the ocean and catch my own. It was so fun. Our gospel reading today introduces us to the disciples who fished for a living. They didn't use poles. They used nets. And when Jesus was teaching one day, they had just come in from a whole night of fishing. It wasn't relaxing and fun. It was their job. And they'd been skunked. And they were cleaning their nets. And it was quite a process. If you've ever seen anyone take care of a fishing net, it's quite a deal. It was a process, and they were physically done after a night of work. They were emotionally done, I would guess, after a discouraging night out. And that's when Jesus comes. He comes amidst their exhaustion, amidst their struggles and disappointments, and he begins to teach. And as Simon has physically and mentally checked out, Jesus asks him to go fishing again. Notice that Simon doesn't exactly jump at the opportunity. Master, we've been fishing all night, but have caught nothing. As you can see, I'm kind of wrapping things up here. Maybe I can show you, how to fish another day. If you're interested, I'll show you where the fishing holes are. but now's probably not such a great time. But then it's as if Simon looks into Jesus' eyes and realizes he's not going to take no for an answer. But if you say so, I'll let down the nets. Maybe you feel like Simon sometimes. Life is an adventure, and it's not always fun. We work through some big snags sometimes that wear us down, wear us out. Do you ever feel like you have a purpose and direction you're being called to pursue, but it seems too great a burden in that moment? Would it be doable? Yeah, maybe. Would it be convenient? No. That's how Simon felt. But in Simon's own exhaustion and depletion is where God's grace and abundance is received. Most of us were brought up with some kind of version of the Protestant work ethic. We work hard, we try to carry our load, take care of ourselves, and that's good, but sometimes we're not ready to receive from others as well. We want to take care of it ourselves. Sometimes it takes moments when you're depleted and over your head to be open to receiving what others want to give you. It can happen simply when you're at the end of your rope on a project around the house, or maybe it's at a time when you're sick, or when you've lost someone you love. You know you need help. You put your pride and your assumptions aside. You defer to someone else or become open to someone else's wisdom or insight. And it's often in those moments when we're able to experience God's grace. It may be a moment when you know you've fallen short that you're able to experience the depth of God's generosity and grace for you. Luke says that they caught so many fish their nets were beginning to break. And they signaled their partners in the other boat to help. And their boat began to sink too. It's over the top abundance. It's the fish story to end all fish stories. It's interesting how Simon responds to this miracle of a catch. Luke says he fell down at Jesus' knees saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man." In the presence of the holy and transcendent, sometimes we're overwhelmed with a sense of humility. Maybe "I'm a sinful person" wouldn't be your first words. Maybe it would be, "I'm not worthy," or "I don't deserve this." Have you ever had a sense of profound humility in a moment of awe and wonder? At a time when you sense the incredible depths of your blessing? That's what Simon is feeling. It's the same response we hear from Isaiah in the reading earlier. It's interesting that a wow moment can do that. Maybe not all the time. Maybe it's the ones that just truly amaze you and stretch your imagination beyond anything you thought possible. But it can make you feel small, make you feel humble. When Jesus asked Simon to let down his nets, he asked him to do it in the deep water. Have you ever tried fishing in the shallows? I'm sure you have. You can catch some fish in the shallow water. You might see some fish under a dock. But if you really want to go fishing, you can't just stay on shore. You have to go out far enough to move out over the deeper waters. Sometimes when it comes to faith, we just like to stay on shore, make a couple of casts with a rod, hope for the best. It's low commitment, low risk, usually low reward. To put a positive spin on it, we just do it for fun. Here's the thing about fishing and faith, though. Most of the wow moments come over the deep water. Maybe it feels like you're over deep water right now. There may be relationships that are in crisis in your life. You might have some personal stuff going on. You may be afraid. Let's think for a moment about how God can enter into the mysterious and sometimes fearful depths of what's going on in your life and the world we live in. Those depths may represent many things, but let's take Simon's words to heart, words of humility and even confession. If you're filled with regrets or feelings of inadequacy over things done or not done, God is gracious and merciful and ready to extend his love to you. Jesus assumed that people need forgiveness. That's why he came. People are weighed down with guilt all the time for not being a better parent, not being a better caregiver, not living up to personal standards, making the time to help someone. The list is endless. We need to hear the words of Jesus in response to Simon. Do not be afraid. God extended words of grace and forgiveness to people throughout his ministry, and he does that for you too. Let's also consider the feeling of the disciples as they came back to shore the first time, exhausted, depleted, unsuccessful after a long period of fishing. When you feel that way yourself, can you be open to receiving the care and blessings from others around you by signaling a need for help? By doing so, we make it possible to become more aware of God's goodness and the abundance of his grace. That abundance doesn't necessarily mean wealth, doesn't always mean the outward signs of success that we want, though we may discover those things too. But it means that in whatever we're facing, we have enough. Paul wrote in Philippians 4, "Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. For I have learned to be content with whatever I have." We're called in faith to let God join us over the deep waters we travel upon, and to listen to his words of encouragement and grace. Trust, don't fear. God's abundant grace and love is available to you. When we discover that is when we experience the wow moments on our own adventure. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.